Okay, hi guys. I'm here today with Mr. Ville Tulkki. In today's episode, we will be focusing on nuclear energy, its history, advantages, and shortcomings. We will also be comparing it to other sources of energy and talk a little bit about its possible future. So, just to introduce you to Mr. Ville Tulkki, he's a Doctor of Science in Technology and a certified project manager from Finland. He is also a member of Fuel&Materials, part of the Halden program group, and is also a member of the Jules Horowitz reactor fuel working group. Mr. Tulkki, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, it's a great pleasure to have you on. So, okay, to start off with, I guess it's important first for people to understand what is nuclear energy, because unfortunately for people who are not really scientifically literate, they still tend to confuse nuclear energy with other pernicious things like nuclear bombs, just because they have the same name, nuclear there. So what would you say is the basic science people have to know in order for them to properly think about nuclear energy and to distinguish it from other things?
Well, I mean, of course, you're having very hard time separating nuclear energy and nuclear weapons in people's mind, especially since unfortunately the use of nuclear chain reaction started with a nuclear bomb. But fortunately, I mean, we have gone ahead of those times, and basically when you produce energy with nuclear reaction, it's basically you're using this kind of uranium or potentially thorium and plutonium to basically just splitting them using neutrons, and with this each splitting there's a new generation of neutrons coming, which then you can actually produce this kind of chain reaction that produces energy, which is then used for power production. And well, the difference between weapons and with use of energy, nuclear use of energy, is basically you're using different techniques. Basically, with the civilian nuclear power, you are using low enriched uranium. That's well, basically you cannot make a bomb out of it. But of course, well, we are always there are basically some points in the nuclear fuel cycle, like enrichment, that's basically the basis for also producing weapons grade material, and that's why we have big international institutions taking care of the safeguards, like International Atomic Energy Association. One big project of theirs is basically making sure that this kind of material is not diverted. So nowadays, basically the civilian use of nuclear energy is quite well separated from the military use. So basically, for instance, in Finland, where I'm from, we have a very large nuclear power program, but we never had any weapons program at all. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so just to talk a little bit about the historical nuclear accidents, so we had Chernobyl, which people know a lot about, and more recently Fukushima. So why did they occur? Was it because of human negligence, human error, bad maintenance? Was it due also to perhaps unpredictable natural disasters? I mean, and just another thing before you answer, what was the real importance when evaluating the employment of nuclear energy or nuclear power? Because how many people really in fact died as a consequence of them, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, one of the things, okay, You're asking actually quite many questions now in a very short time. So if we are looking at the just radiological effects of these accidents, for Chernobyl there has been like few tens of deaths due to the radiation, and for Fukushima there has been 0 deaths due to the radiation, and this accounts also for the things like long-term cancer and so on, or as calculations for long-term cancer. But the real impact of these accidents have, of course, been like because these families or villages and so communities have been had to relocate, and especially it has been said that for Chernobyl, the kind of like message for all the people who have been relocated that they are the victims of nuclear power. It has had very much of this kind of psychological consequences, which is of course like a consequence of this accident, but it's not in effect like this kind of radiological. But we must, of course, take this into account. As to the reasons, well, Chernobyl, it was a bit strange reactor design that was actually, such reactors would have been illegal in West because of some of the features they were having, which in part caused the accident. But of course, there is like a whole issue that this accident was a consequence also of a test that was quite irresponsible, in the sense that they had taken offline most of the safety systems in order to actually do this test. So it was you can never, of course, take away the human from these things. So if you don't have an organization that's responsible, that's just telling like, no, we are not going to do that kind of thing, then you're going to be in a trouble in like any industry. Same thing applies that if you have like total negligence in like chemical industry. Actually, I think that we had also this kind of like reports that in Sosnoy Bori, which is a sister facility to Chernobyl, 1 or 2 years before, there was a like initiative that, okay, let's make this kind of experiment, and people at the facility said that they refused to do this because of this kind of dangers included, which is something that people, the organization at Chernobyl should have done. But yeah, as to Fukushima, well, basically the basic reason was the tsunami that was like 1 in 1,000-year event, in a sense. Of course, for nuclear, we should have facilities that can withstand once in 1,000-year events, but this was not happening. As to it's once again you get into this kind of like organizational things. There is a nuclear facility closer to the epicenter of the earthquake, which stood the accident, but this was because the management had actually like taken into account that, okay, indeed we can have this kind of huge tsunamis. And in Japan, when you're looking at most of these tsunami walls, it's the 6 meters, because it was traditionally thought that, okay, this is as much as we can prepare for, and if something happens after that, it's the fate. But of course, here, I don't think that we can have such a fatalism in nuclear. Yeah. I hope that this answers your question.
Yeah, of course. And did these accidents reveal some sort of prediction errors coming from the science behind nuclear power, particularly in terms of the security measures?
Well, I think that basically what his accident revealed was more of the need, and they also emphasized the importance of like this kind of holistic approach to safety, which includes like safety culture. Safety culture is something that was brought in as a science, as a concept by nuclear field, and it has spread now to other fields also. The idea that the safety is paramount and you must train the whole organization into the safety culture. So because these accidents, there was, I mean, the facilities or nuclear power plants, they acted as predicted in these kind of scenarios, but it was basically taking all these kind of like scenarios had not been necessarily taken into account because of well, people overlooking them. Basically, after Chernobyl, there has been or there was a huge emphasis on severe accident management. So okay, these accidents happen, so we need to mitigate their effects so that there is not going to be any release. For instance, like if you are looking at Finnish power plants, all the power plants have extensive severe accident management plans. If the reactor melts down, all the radioactive substances must still be contained within the structures. And after Fukushima, I believe that basically what it showed that we need to take into account like many separate things that can happen at the same time, such as like in Fukushima, first there was the earthquake, and then there was the tsunami, which basically the basic problem was that at Fukushima the diesel generators that were supposed to operating the pumps, they were put in the basement because of the earthquake. In most of the other places they are put quite high, but because of earthquake protection, all this equipment were in the basements, which were flooded by the tsunami. Mm-hmm. So you cannot only like take into account like earthquake, you also need to find out that if there's like several different things happening at the same time. And these Fukushima lessons have been taken and have been like there has been stress tests and then not repairs, but some new solutions put in nuclear power plants globally because of the lessons learned.
Mm-hmm. But just to make it clear for people who might watch this later, these types of accidents shouldn't make us rethink about using nuclear power as a source of electrical energy, right?
Yeah, well, I think that after Fukushima, it was quite surprising that there were actually many people who were looking at this thing, that okay, we have 3 nuclear power plants that have been like destroyed, and the world did not end. I mean, the contamination, it's in the relatively small region. There are no radiological, there are no deaths due to the radioactivity. I mean, when you are looking at this kind of like debate, this like destruction of 3 nuclear power plants should have been like end of the world. But suddenly it's not. So in that sense, I think that even that showed to many people that actually maybe some of these fears have been overblown. So, but of course, for the local people, it is a serious like issue that they cannot return to their homes yet. Of course, more and more people can return nowadays to their homes, but of course, it's locally it's a very serious issue, and I don't want to in any way like de-emphasize that. But globally, it's still relatively small impact. So, and this is basically when you're looking at the challenges that we are facing at this moment, like climate change and biodiversity degradation and so on. At least I'm in the saying that basically we need all our sources of clean energy, and this does include nuclear.
Mm-hmm. And what are the main advantages of nuclear energy and its disadvantages, or perhaps even shortcomings? And I don't know if you already want to compare it with other sources of energy like renewables, or perhaps we could leave that to another question.
Well, I'll try to answer you. Basically, the main advantage and also disadvantage of nuclear energy is that it has very high power density. So you can actually produce very lot of energy in a very small space. Of course, when things go bad, it also means that this is a bit hard to basically this is also leads to the potential like nuclear accidents. But the idea is that nuclear, you have very dense, or you can produce a lot of energy with very small material inputs. You can produce this electricity or power when you need it, so it's dispatchable, and it's basically like running all over the year, so it's predictable. So and also one of the things I've been doing last couple of years is looking into the future role of nuclear, and in addition to producing electricity, basically, okay, with nuclear power you first produce heat and you convert it to electricity. So you can actually use the heat, and at least in Europe, I mean, in many countries like Finland, I think in Portugal was just like 100% renewable March or something like that. So basically, we are like doing very well with electricity, but with the heat, industrial heat, residential heat, most of that is just by burning fossil fuels. So basically nuclear could also be used as a source of industrial heat. So that's its versatility is a very good thing. On disadvantage, of course, basically at this point it seems to be very difficult to start nuclear new build. I mean, the legal issues and also these current new builds in Europe and in US have been like, well, project management failures. So these are big projects, and since our generation does not have experience in building them, because most of the nuclear new build in Europe, in US, was built by our father's generation. So there is no like a practical experience in the new builds. So basically this kind of like practical experience can only be gained by building them. So but this is of course like now the question is whether this is a failure to start, and how to actually accomplish this kind of like nuclear new build in this current political climate, where nuclear is quite not in favor, especially in Europe. And because of this kind of like very strong, like, well, very hard to actually get this process started because of the licensing and so on, and because these first projects in decades have been quite costly. So now the question is, of course, what's the like cost of nuclear? So and here we are especially having these renewables that have been they used to be very expensive, but thanks to a very extensive build out by learning by doing, the cost has come down very much. So basically, if you're looking just like incremental addition of clean energy, renewables are cheaper than nuclear. But then when you are looking at our end goal, which is a totally clean or totally low emission power system, you can see that basically all of these different sources have their own limitations. And we cannot at this point say for sure whether or not we can actually do this kind of like 100% renewable power system, because of we can do it, but we don't know how much it would cost. And it would appear that this kind of like a reasonable power system that's totally low emission would include both renewables and nuclear, depending on the local conditions. So in that sense, when you ask me to compare to other power sources, I think that in future we will need to find a way to basically accommodate a lot of variable renewable generation, but also nuclear can help, and having some sort of like nowadays people call it like flexible base in the power generation, it would be very beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
So nuclear.
Sorry. You wanted to say something else?
No, well, that was about it.
Okay. So, you touched a little bit on carbon emissions. So, how does nuclear energy perform in terms of carbon emissions in comparison with, for example, oil, gas, and coal?
Well, I mean, for life cycle analysis, the carbon intensity of producing nuclear energy is it's a low carbon source, so it's like about, I think I've seen between 10 and 17 grams per kilowatt hour produced, whereas for coal it's 800. For oil, it's I guess it's about the same. For gas, it's like 450 grams. And solar, depending on where you produce the panels and where you use them, it's from I think from like 10 to 50 grams. And for wind, it's about the same as nuclear. So basically, when we are looking at this kind of low carbon sources, we are having like nuclear, wind, solar, and then of course then we can existing hydro, and then there's like difficulties whether you're actually doing huge it's location dependent, what kind of like emissions you're getting from hydro, depending on how big a reservoir you're building and what's in the reservoir. And then there is in Finland now a big debate on how to actually calculate the carbon emissions from using biofuels, biomass.
Mm-hmm. So, just to be sure, as you're saying earlier, if I understood it correctly, it's not possible for us to talk about nuclear power as being the most environment-friendly source of energy, right? At least in comparison to renewables, it depends on the local conditions, right?
It depends on your point of view. What kind of things you are like valuing? Like with nuclear, there is basically, of course, we are producing radioactive waste. So, but this is something that is actually quite well contained and can we deal with.
Sorry, to interrupt you there, because that was another question I wanted to pose to you. How are the waste products treated in the nuclear power plants?
can I come back to this question later on? Because I was just wanting to say that basically with the solar and wind, when you compare them, it's basically you need a lot more land area to harvest the energy. And you are also needing quite a lot of like material to building like windmills and so on. So it actually like what's the best depends on which things you value most. And this is basically something that I would say that if we are going like full on with the wind, then we are like putting windmills everywhere. So we don't necessarily want to go like 100% wind. If we are going 100% of solar, the same thing, we actually need to have huge amount of solar power and figure out storage. And if we are going full on with the nuclear, it's this waste issue, and there's also like this kind of thing that we are then reliant on one power source. So basically, in that sense, I don't think that it's a very relevant question that which is the environmentally best, because we will need to figure out for the future this kind of like a energy system that's as low impact as possible, and all of these sources have some impacts of their own. So we need to have a balancing act, and like saying that we are just supposed to go for one energy source, it's not sustainable in that long run. So in that sense, I would like contest that if you want to have like what's the best, I don't think that there is a best. Yeah. Okay. But unless you have something on that, I'll go to waste. Or
yeah. You can follow up.
Yeah. Okay. Nuclear waste. So basically, the waste issue is something that, okay, when you're producing electricity with nuclear power, you are getting spent nuclear fuel, which basically has most of the uranium in it still, but then it also has radioactive byproducts of fission, like that, and then you have also transuranics, which come from the neutron capture of uranium. So basically, there is this kind of like radioactive light isotopes that come from fission, and the heavy isotope that comes from the captured neutrons, because all the neutrons do not necessarily cause fission. Big nuclei can also just like capture them. So basically, this kind of like radiation that's emitted by this spent nuclear fuel, it can be stopped like by let's say 1 meter of concrete or 1 meter of water or a few meters of water. So basically, these are and it's basically decays exponentially, so that it's very radioactive immediately after taking it away from a reactor, and then it goes like down quite quickly. So it starts to emit some radioactivity, some heat, but then for several years you need to cool these fuel bundles in water, and this water also acts as a barrier to radioactivity, and then after that you can either keep cooling them in water or put them into air-cooled like concrete containers. And basically, for instance, in Finland we are using the water cooling until we put them into final disposal facility, which is currently under construction. And in some countries they have decided that, okay, they put them into this kind of air-cooled dry storage, and until they figure out what to do with them. Mm-hmm. So basically, and with this kind of, especially with dry storage, you don't actually need to do anything to them. You can just, well, for a while, you can just like leave them for decades to wait until your final disposal solution. And at the same time, the radioactivity goes down all the time. So basically, where we are at this point is that some countries have this kind of reprocessing, where you are taking away the usable material and using this, putting these fission products into a glass sort of substance which they intend to bury. And then we have countries like Finland and Sweden who have quite advanced final disposal projects. So in Finnish concepts, we are putting the fuel bundles into a metal cask, which is put into a copper canister, which is put underground, 450 meters underground into a disposal facility, and this is closed down. And the idea is that these both man-made and natural barriers separate these radioactive isotopes from the biosphere, so that eventually, even if there's a breach, the amount of radioactivity that reaches biosphere will be so small that it will not have any effects on life. So, and of course, but this is basically like the direct disposal, and then there's the like recycling. And I think that basically these are like technologically doable both, and it's like pros and cons. With direct disposal, a small country like Finland can actually like responsibly dispose all of their waste, and it's like dealt with. And also we are having like minimal interaction with spent fuel, so there is no like danger to humans at any point. With reprocessing, you can get lots and lots of more of energy out of the same fuel, and the time needed for the rest of the nuclear waste to decay to harmless level is lots smaller, but you need to handle the fuel, and you need to like dissolve the fuel and collect all the things. And so basically this industrial process and so on, which is only feasible for the larger countries. So this is like basically decision on which route you want to go. Both have good and both have bad ideas. And what's been at this point has been chosen by many of the countries is to wait out, or wait for some other countries to demonstrate that, okay, we have done this. So like many countries are waiting for Finland and Sweden to demonstrate the final disposal concept, and then they can go like, okay, yes, we are doing that thing. So but this is made possible because actually, like from the spent nuclear fuel, it's not like you don't need. It's not actively dangerous. It's not actively harming the environment. It's contained very well and quite easily. So you can actually like have 10 years waiting for some other people to come up with a solution. And for some strange reason, we in Finland and also in Sweden have been like at the forefront here, just because probably something to do with the like basic nature of, okay, let's get this thing sorted out. But it's seen as this kind of responsibility of our generation who are benefiting from nuclear power to actually like also take care that this kind of like issue of disposal will not be burden to the next generation. So this is basically one form of this kind of intergenerational justice. Mm-hmm. Take care of our own waste.
Yeah. And now to talk a little bit about the future of nuclear energy. So we already had three or four generations in terms of nuclear reactors, the first, the second, the third, and the third plus, if I'm not mistaken. And more recently, people have been talking more about the fourth generation of nuclear reactors. So from one generation to the next, in what ways have the nuclear reactors improved? Was it in terms of security measures, in terms of efficiency? And what is the fourth generation about?
Yeah, so basically the first generation were the first test demonstration power plants. Second generation is the thing that we nowadays associate with nuclear power, the currently running nuclear power plants. Third generation and well 3 plus, it's basically the family of designs that were designed in the 90s, in the 20s, with more and more this kind of like passively working safety systems, more and more like inbuilt severe accident management system, like EPR that's being built in Olkiluoto in Finland. It has this core catcher. So basically, if core melts and it goes through the pressure vessel, there is a core catcher below it that basically takes the melt down and spreads it and cools it down. So basically, this kind of like the generation 2 was the current operating reactors, generation 3 safety improvements, and especially this kind of like severe accident management, and generation 4. Generation 4 was a term that was coined in 2001. And after it was coined, it of course locked in the previous designs, and then the vendors said that, okay, but generation 3 is only this, we have improved designs. So they were saying that, okay, we are using generation 3 plus, because they couldn't use 4 anymore because it was already taken. Okay, but generation 4 was about this kind of different approach to nuclear reactors, because generation 2 and 3 are light water reactors, so where the fuel is both cooled and the neutrons are moderated by light water, or the common water, as it say. Then generation 4 includes things like graphite moderated gas-cooled reactors, which can reach very high temperatures, sodium-cooled reactors, lead-cooled reactors, so metal-cooled reactors that have this kind of like very fast neutron spectrum, which enables breeding of more fuel from the old, from the spent fuel, for instance. And then there's things like molten salt reactors, where the fuel is carried around by them in a molten salt. So these are very different type of reactors than the light water reactors. All of these reactor designs were tested or prototyped in the 60s, and some development has been going on with various different concepts. So this kind of but this generation 4 is kind of like umbrella term for something completely new. Then there's basically generation 4. The big push for it has been the fast reactors that are essential for closing the fuel cycle. So instead of having these transuranics that are take very long time to decay, you are putting them into this fast reactor that you breed more fuel out of them. So this comes also back to the question of what to do with waste, whether to have the final disposal or direct disposal, or to develop these fast reactors that you can close the fuel cycle with. So, in addition to fast reactors, there's the high temperature reactors, these gas cooled reactors that can go like 600-700 degrees C, 800 degrees C, which you can use then for industrial heat and heat also, in addition to producing electricity. So I think that for the future of the nuclear, basically for the large countries like USA, France, Russia, China, if they want to like have this kind of closed fuel cycle, if they want to have like a nuclear industry that's going on and that can produce energy with nuclear power for decades or centuries or millennia, they will want to go develop these kind of fast reactors and closed fuel cycle. But it remains to be seen. Like in US, we are seeing that they are actually closing their nuclear power plants, and we don't know yet. But then there's also the possibility for these high temperature reactors to actually like assist in the industrial processes, because most of these many industrial processes take a lot of heat, and now it's being produced by fossil fuels. So how to do this, because you cannot just like stop and start many of these industrial processes. You need something that's dispatchable energy to them. So this is, I think, one of the big opening possibilities for the future nuclear. And in China is very interesting in this regard, because there's this Pebble Bed Reactor, which is basically this kind of like fist size pebbles, which are like contain small pebbles of uranium into a graphite ball. That basically you have this kind of like huge reactor with hundreds of thousands of these pebbles, and they're cooled by helium, and basically produce high temperature helium there, which can be used for heating water. They have now they have now built this reactor, and they should be starting it up this year. So they intend to like demonstrate this kind of like very passively safe high temperature reactors that can be used not only for power production but also for industrial heat. And for China it's very important, because factor is also this combined heat and power, because now in northern China they are having huge number of coal power plants that are like must run during the winter, because they are not only producing electricity, they are also producing heat for the district heating networks, and this is like absolutely destroying their local air quality because of all these kind of emissions. So they would use these kind of like Pebble Bed reactors to just supply the heat to the existing turbines. So they are just replacing the coal burner with this kind of like Pebble Bed reactors to actually producing and then using the existing infrastructure. So to produce this kind of clean combined heat and power. So this is something that's going on quite a lot, especially like in countries like China at this moment. So and considering that we have had like this kind of like a bit of stagnation in the nuclear for the past few decades, I think that at this point there is quite a lot of like new things happening with this new innovative reactors, so to say. But it's still like quite early to say how big the change will be.
Mm-hmm. And with all these generations of nuclear reactors, we're talking here about reactors that work with nuclear fission, right? So
Yes.
a nuclear fission reaction. So, and about nuclear fusion. Is it still too conceptual, or could it turn out to be in the future a better alternative than fission?
Well, I used to, during my undergraduate years, I used to work also with the fusion. So it's this is my opinion, but it's basically the promise of fusion is that basically you are getting power out of what's basically from water and rock. So you use lithium and deuterium from water, or lithium from rocks and deuterium from water. So it's what it at this moment is. It's very challenging because it's very challenging progress, because you have this kind of like plasma that you must keep contained and so on in order to for a long time in order to produce energy, and you have this kind of like very high demands for the materials and so on. So how I view this, that at this moment fusion is very challenging science, and it's very high level of science that the fusion community is doing. They are basically aiming for this kind of like demonstration of ongoing or demonstration of possibility of using fusion for energy production, which is in the ITER and the future demo projects, and basically the commercial fusion would be like 2050s, 2060s, something like that. So at this point, it's basically very challenging science, which is always something that's good to support, and it also represents something new that's coming up in the pipeline. So of course, by 2050, 2060s, we should have already very extremely clean power and energy system. But still, the world does not end there. We will still need some new solutions and some new alternatives. So in that sense, I don't want to like say that fusion comes too late, because we are not. I will be retired by 50. I will retire in the 2050s, and but I don't think that the world will be ready by the time I retire. So there will be new challenges, and hopefully fusion will be also one of these things that can assist there. But at this moment, with his current funding levels, it's still science, and so also challenging technological challenges that need to be solved.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So, Mr. Tulkki, I think it was a very interesting and informative conversation we had here. Just before we finish, and by the way, don't end the call after I finish the recording, because I just want to give you a quick word. Just before we finish, would you like just to tell people where they perhaps can follow you, or on social media or something like that?
Well, I have my Twitter feed where I do half of these uploads on nuclear and half time like life of were very unprofessional comments, but it's Ville Tulkki, the handle, and also well, we have been doing this, or we have established this environmental organization in Finland, Eco-Modernist Society of Finland. So there is also some possibilities if you're following those people. I think that's it for the English media or English-speaking people.
Okay, great. So, do you want to add something else?
Well, it was very nice talking to you, so thank you for having me.
Okay, I thank you. It was a great pleasure to have you on. Okay. If you appreciate my work, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/thedissenter. Thank you.